I am really excited to actually return to your group. I facilitated a session back in, I think, 2020. And I have to say, meeting with you and hearing the work that you're doing, just fills my heart. This group and how you're engaged in the work that you're doing to advance the research you're doing with the patient and family driving it really does inspire me. So when I was writing this presentation, I was like, how do I inspire you back to continue the great work that you're doing? And I'm hoping that my presentation today will do that. But in addition to just inspiring you, I want to validate the work that you're doing and give you the confidence that you're on the right track so that you continue this into the future. So I'm hoping that will be the goal of the session, and that'll be what comes out of it in the end. So as you heard, I have a personal background in patient engagement. I started as a patient and family advisor after spending some time in the hospital with my son. And I'm going to give you a bit of a journey through my history because I think that it will help you understand where I've come from, why I'm passionate about patient and family engagement, and it'll help you share a vision with me into the future of how great engagement can be and what type of work we can accomplish together. So my story begins actually almost 10 years ago to the day. This was the view from my room across the street at Mount Sinai. This was actually my first view of sick kids. I had known that my son was going to have some complications after birth. I didn't expect them to be as complex as they were, but I was hospitalized earlier than I had expected as well. So we didn't even have a chance to get into the doors of sick kids, do the tour of the NICU and do all that sort of stuff before I was hospitalized. So this view of the older side of the hospital without seeing the new atrium on the other side, this was my first encounter with sick kids. Prior to this, I had nothing to do with healthcare. I was a strategy consultant, living my life, planning for the future with my family, and never, ever expected that I would be involved in healthcare, health research, or patient and family engagement. After a few days after this picture was taken, this was my next view. My son was born so early that we didn't actually have a name for him. He was baby Buchanan at the time, and it wasn't till a couple of days later that we did name him, and the bravery beads solidified that to us. So this is a picture of you can see the start of his name, Christ, and this kind of really made it real. At this time, we're in the hospital full of uncertainty. I could barely remember what had happened 5 minutes before, never mind planning for a future. We definitely didn't know that our future was going to entail 507 days in the hospital with him, or 507, that's a typo actually, 507 days with him in the hospital. And I can tell you that of those 507 days, the first 10 months or so, I barely remember. I was terrified, filled with uncertainty. If you look at this picture of me, you can see me looking up into the camera where I am just surrounded by unknowns, terrified, but there's a little glimmer of hope in there. There's a little bit of hope for the future. We used to walk by this sign at the Art Gallery of Ontario every day as we would come into the hospital. And this really was my mantra for those beginning days. The sign says, please believe these days will pass. But some days I didn't want the days to pass too quickly. Those were the good days, the days when my son would give us a little bit of a smile, the days where the stress would ease a little bit, more joy entered, and those days would let me turn a little bit to hope. In those eyes, I could maybe see an inkling of a future. I could maybe see an inkling of what was to come, But what it did do, and many of you might know this if you've had time in the hospital, is the stress eased and it made me look at the things around me. I would observe the interactions. Why was the nurse charting like that in the chart? What were the doctors talking about? What was a family meeting and what were we to expect? I was kind of getting into this groove of being within this hospital environment and getting a sense of what was going on around me. I can tell you I had a lot of time to think about that and a lot of time to observe. Because again, if you spend any time in the hospital, you know, you sit around a lot just waiting for rounds, waiting for the doctor to come in, waiting for the next nurse check in. Now that kind of led me to my next phase in my life. I'd been there, I'd seen what was going on, I'd observed some challenges, and I thought, hey, maybe I can help have impact on those challenges. After my son was discharged from the hospital, the next phase of my life was to find meaning in our experience. What could I do to take all that time we had spent in the hospital, all that joy that I had experienced, all those days where the joy was diminished because maybe a doctor came in and wanted me to prepare me for something. All those moments could bring meaning to me, but also could help families in the future. So I decided I was going to go back to school. At that time, I thought, if I'm going to change the healthcare system, I have to talk like a researcher. I have to learn like a researcher. I have to be like those experts that I see on the other side of the table when I'm sitting down at meetings. I really did put my heart and soul into, entering this world, this space, but with my lived experience. But a funny thing happened when I showed up to my first day of class. This picture here is my son and I. This is how we would travel through the hallways. He would join me at class whenever I had to go, because for a child as complex as him, there's no daycare that he can go to. So we would walk the halls together. We would get together and he would sit outside my classroom with a nurse or a childcare worker. And the funny thing that happened was that when we were walking the halls or we were playing outside the classroom, those nursing students, those researchers, those doctors, all my fellow students would come up and chit chat. They were so curious about what it was like to travel in a stroller like this, what it was like to be out in the wild. And the reason they were curious is because they'd always seen us as patients in their offices, patients in the hospital room. My child was in the ICU till the day that he was discharged. And ICU doctors don't often see their patients out in the wild. They don't often see a ventilator, tracheostomy, feeding tube, and oxygen tanks outside of a PICU room. But we were there and we were living our best lives. And those students would come up and chat, and they were really curious to learn. They had a keen interest in understanding our experiences. And I thought, this is so interesting. They want to know what my life is like. They don't have insight into my life. I'm happy to share my insights with them. But then a funny thing happened as soon as I stepped into the classroom. When I stepped into the classroom, I was met with a little bit of skepticism. Here's a person who doesn't have any background in healthcare. Here's a person who wasn't working as a nurse, wasn't working as a physiotherapist or pharmacist. Can I trust that experience that they have? I was treated with my opinion might be judged. Although I basically sat inside a hospital for 2 years, that experience, the way it was filtered through my life as an outsider, was questioned. But rather than judging my classmates for judging me, being skeptical of me, and sometimes outright dismissing what I had to say, I listened. And what I heard was behind the skepticism was really just a sense of fear. And what I saw outside the classroom and inside the classroom were those exact same people. One with a sense of hope that we can make life better together in the future. If I can understand what my patients' lives are like outside in the wild, outside the clinic room, then we can make things better for everyone. But at the same time, in the classroom was just that little sense of fear. What were they afraid of? They were afraid that they might need to spend an extra little bit of time teaching me. They might need to spend a little more time translating the research for me, or kind of using different terms than the jargony ones they would use. They were afraid that they listened to me, that they might be stuck because I would lead them astray. I would lead them off the path of that research that they really need to accomplish, those publications, that rigor, the type of things that they get measured on an everyday basis to move things forward. They feared that it might turn anecdotal, that their research might become biased, that if they engaged in outsider ideas, that they wouldn't stay on the path that would get them to their future and get that research done that they wanted done. I got it. I felt it too. I needed to be more rigorous, more scientific. I had to follow the rules because I was an outsider. I had to do it their way. But what I also realized is that since they're both sides of the same coin, we can work together by understanding the hope and understanding the fear and sharing how we feel on both sides to move together to a brighter future. So that's what I'm going to kind of go through right now and give you a sense of hope by understanding the fear. And the first thing is, the reason I got into patient engagement was to try and bridge this gap between hope and fear. And this is sometimes how it felt when I first got into it. You know, their patients and families have an idea of what might solve solutions. They might have ideas that should be listened to, but that path towards research is moving so fast. No thanks, we're too busy. We're on track. We got it. We'll come talk to you at the end when we need you to help produce an infographic or an image to help translate so we can get the research out. But right now we're good. We're good. Talk to you in a bit. But if we go back to those two sides of the coin, we can think that, you know, there's potential to do things better, but just what we have to do is take a minute, stop, and look around us. The other thing that I felt when I was doing patient engagement work on the advisor side is, you know, sometimes it just seems like this. They have a complicated process, a complicated system, and then they say, well, what do you think? What's your opinion? Tell me the patient perspective. But they haven't taken the time to actually tell us, you know, what is it that we can do? What is it that we're going to do together? What are our goals together? How are we going to share this information? And how am I going to share the background that has gone into it so that we know we're traveling the same path together? I'll give you an example, consent forms. So consent forms, of course, you know, they're written in a certain way because there's different systems of ethics that they need to abide by. But often we give patients and families consent forms and say, what do you think about it? Is this clear, easy to read, understandable? You look at it and you go, yeah, I guess. I would change this, this, and this. But you don't always voice that opinion of what you would change because you think, this is the way it's been for so long. What does it matter if I have anything to say about it? So it's those open conversations about what you can change, how you can change, and how it's going to be meaningful for you, the research team, and potential future patients in the future. It's funny that we think about patients and families sometimes as having this, you know, innate expertise that no one else has, but at the same time are not capable of understanding the complexity of medicine or the medical system. They kind of hold these two positions at the same time. But when we think about it, these two views, these two things of having innate experience and having a not understanding of the complexities of medicine is this same side of the same coin. It's this idea of having hope that we can tap into that expertise to use it to advance things into the future, but also that fear that we might not do it right. We might mess it up. We might misinterpret what we hear. So I'll continue on with this, giving you a bit of hope and kind of giving you a bit of fear so you understand it. So my hope is that I think we clearly don't say this enough, and to this group especially, I want to share it. Everyone has the capacity to contribute. Everyone is an expert in their own experience. You don't need to be an expert in every patient's experience, but you can use your experience to inform others, and you can use your experience to inform the ability to listen to others. Sharing your own experience is one part of contributing, but listening, reflecting on your own experience so that you can grow is another way that you can contribute. Growing collective knowledge is kind of my hope for the future. But there's also a fear of not being able to do it right. Moving ahead cautiously is better than bearing ahead with no fear, but not moving ahead and being limited by your fear is what we want to avoid. So the question is, what do we do to move ahead with caution and check in that you're doing things right? It is that open collaboration with your research partners, open collaboration of your research partner with your research team. Asking people, checking in, inviting conversations that might be a little bit tough. That didn't feel right. Or I don't think you understood that. How can we do it so that we can have this conversation moving forward? Sometimes checking your ego at the door and listening to other sides is a great way to step forward. And that happens on both sides. There is hope that we're not stuck where we are right now. I am not who I was yesterday. And tomorrow I will be a completely different person than I am today. Really reflect on that. There's beauty in that. There's hope in that. I'm not stuck in the same mindset today. And I have a chance to change tomorrow. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But if I take a wrong step, tomorrow I have a chance to correct it. We all have that capacity, and it's up to us to see that capacity in others and not look upon others as they only have one perspective, they only have one role, they only have one way to think about things. It is our capacity, it is our privilege to offer those opportunities to others to share and grow along with us. And holding their hand and bringing in new people to do that is a privilege that we have by already being in this community of patients and families. There's a bit of fear, this stuff is tough. The system is built against us. I do a whole lecture that's an hour long about the history of patient engagement and where it came from to give people a sense of the history of research and why we are so challenged to overcome this system to do meaningful collaboration together. But with that hope in mind, we have the capacity to change as individuals. We as individuals can change the system. It might take little steps, it might take baby steps, but we have the capacity to work the system to change it for the better. But we have to be involved as patients and families if we're going to move the system towards a future that we see benefiting us all together. I say this is a hope. The system might move. It does move slowly, but the hope is it's moving. It is changing. It is frustrating sometimes the amount of time it takes to see research happen, to see change happen, to see, voices heard that weren't heard before, or reach out to new communities that haven't been reached out to. But making change can happen even if it's small steps forward. If you change a few minds, if you make a few connections, even here today, by sharing your story of how it felt to work on a project and be engaged, you might bring in one researcher, you might bring in one advisor that then brings in another advisor that starts to a cascade of new advisors. That is the hope that we are constantly moving forward and change. And I have that hope, that future, because we can have a bright future together. If we overcome these challenges of fear overshadowing hope, and we do that through collaboration and partnership, it really means that health research can be informed by the patient and family experience. Health research can be co-created with the family experience in mind, and that things that really matter to patients and families can drive our future together. So I'm going to leave it with that, with a sense of optimism about the future of patient and family engagement. Questions? Okay. I don't know if there's questions online. If you want to turn on your cameras so we can see who's asking questions, or just see who's there on a Sunday morning at home. Yeah, questions.
Francine, thank you so much for that. I was wondering, was there something about your personal experience that made you start thinking about being involved? Was there like a one experience, or was it just living through it and seeing there was conversations happening?
I think there were multiple experiences. I'll share you the one experience that really kind of said, I need to show this more often because it really matters. Well, we were in the ICU when we were on rounds, and in the ICU, the rounding all comes to your door. So the group of, fellows and staff and all support were at the door. And if you're in healthcare, you're in the hospital for a long amount of time, that July is the transition to new students coming in to learn. So it was new and fresh for this group of students. And my son had challenges retaining water. So his water retention would require drugs to kind of balance it. And the staff turned to one of the fellows and said, so what do we think? Does he need more Lasix? And he looked around and he looked at the numbers. He looked at all the test results. He turned to the pharmacist. He turned to the nurse. He was asking everyone all these questions about it. And he still didn't have an answer. It was kind of in between fuzzy. And the staff just looked at him and said, "Did you ask Mom? Mom was here yesterday. Mom was here the day before. Mom was here all last month when he was having these challenges. She knows when he needs Lasix, and she knows when he doesn't need Lasix." And the fellow was like, "Oh, I didn't even think of asking Mom." And it was that experience, not because of that experience. It was the feeling of that, like, whoa, let me just listen to, that's so cool. But it was like, I wonder if other parents, I wonder if other doctors are doing this. And that was a thing that made me be like, this is a story that will not get out unless people want to get this story out. And the feeling I felt in that morning was a story that needed to get out. It was that experience that needed to get out. And I think that is what made me realize that I have a role as a patient that isn't necessarily a role of medicine, but it's a role of the experience and how you feel where you are, and how research around things affects how you feel and how you experience life. And I was on a high for like months after that experience. I was like, I'm the greatest. But that was one of the experiences that really solidified it for me.
Hi, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. You mentioned something about kind of not being involved, I guess, or not being asked for your opinion until you get to the knowledge translation stage, which I think is really interesting because all of the things that you do before that is actually knowledge synthesis. Like that's how you make the information, and that's how we create knowledge. So I'm wondering what part of your experiences do you think would have um, or what do you think we should do, I guess, as researchers or health professionals to involve patients in the knowledge synthesis part of the process rather than just once we do all the work, getting you to translate it and make it easier to read?
So when I teach my class on how to do patient and family engagement, the one piece of advice that I give is start early. Because when you start early and you start partnering with patients early in your research process, like way at the ideation stage, your top 10 priorities is great because the top 10 priorities gives a foundation to say, okay, now how do we move together forward with these top 10 priorities? So starting really early is the number one. But when you start early, you also allow the voice to kind of permeate throughout the study. So we're doing a research study right now. It's a very large cross Canada data collection around COVID patients that are inpatients. And when we got involved, we made sure that there was a patient and family advisor on the steering committee, the executive, because this is a large study, on the planning process. There's multiple people at different layers. What that did is at different meetings, ideas get generated, but also problems are identified. So one of the problems that was identified, it wasn't even a problem that was identified. It was kind of like a preemptive, we know this is going to be a problem, was recruitment. It's a very complex study. Understanding why you're sharing your data is very difficult. So one of the things that was identified is we need to power this study. Sorry, I'm using jargon, but we need to have enough people enrolled in this study that we have enough data to do the analysis properly. So we knew right away recruitment was going to be essential. They needed to have, we were recruiting people that were not infected with COVID and infected with COVID. So we needed to recruit people that, didn't even have a stake in the game, right? So we knew all this stuff. One of the things that we did or we're doing right now is not just the consent forms, but we said to them as patients, we're sitting in the hospital room, we're sitting in the emergency department. I'm going to read the consent. I'm going to glaze over it. I kind of don't know. I don't really know, but I might go look at a website. I might go find out I might Google some things while I'm sitting in my child's room. I'm going to do all these other things to supplement my knowledge around if I want to do this or not. Have we distributed information that is patient and family friendly in all these other places? So now we're doing a part of a sub-project to actually partner with patients and families to say, if you were to go to our website, what would you expect to read? What do you want to see? What is really important to say, yes, I want to be part of this study? And then what do you want to see when you're part of it halfway through the study or later on? That would not have happened if we didn't have people at certain meeting tables throughout the study to raise that perspective and raise that voice. So when I say, how do you partner with patients and families in the knowledge translation throughout the study? And that is clearly knowledge. We're translating the knowledge of why we decided to do that study. We're translating the knowledge on why it's important to collect this data. That is knowledge translation. It's just we don't think of it as like the knowledge from the study that we're doing. But that sort of thing is, how do you do it? You partner with people early. You put them in positions where you can hear them. You take the power away from yourself, where you're kind of inviting them to just give opinions on certain parts, but really make them part of the team so that you can hear the ideas that are generated. I'm doing a talk tomorrow and I'm talking to students, and my conclusion in that talk is, how do you partner with patients and families? You treat them the same way you would treat your thesis supervisor and the way you want your thesis supervisor to treat you. You want to collaborate them on a professional level where the power dynamics are lowered and you share ideas back and forth. That's how you partner effectively with patients and families. Long rambling answer.
Thank you so much, Francine, for your responses just now and your talk today. It's so inspiring. You mentioned a minute ago that you don't know what you don't know. And I heard you share that your lived experience was what motivated you to become a patient partner in research. I'm just curious, as someone that's working to engage with more families, what if someone didn't have that lived experience to want them or motivate them to be engaged in research? Do you have any suggestions of how we reach that population of patients and try to incentivize them to contribute? I mean, we're doing that now, but you had that lived experience that motivated you. I'm just wondering if patients haven't experienced that firsthand, what messages or what in your experience has been effective?
So it's really about bringing meaning to their life, whatever their experience are.
Mhm.
So right now, a big thing that I'm working on is this idea of like, how do you engage the patients that haven't even walked in the door yet, right? If you're doing research on, risk of falls or risk of, injuries on the playground, that doesn't help them when they're in the ER getting treated for a head injury, right? We need to engage people before they even come into into the hospital. And one of those things is trying to connect your research, what you're doing, what your goals are, what your values are as a group, with those communities where they are. So it may be, if you're looking at people with the potential of RB or early diagnosis, that sort of thing, it's really kind of say, okay, what is it that average patients and families are concerned about in their lives? Is it their child acting differently? Is it their child struggling in school? Is it their child, with peers? If you can connect at that level, then you bring them in to get further engagement about what that means. So if we talk about, for my son, it might be somewhere around, how do you engage with families that have an early diagnosis of a congenital defect with my son? They don't even know what to expect. They don't know what they don't. It might be just sitting down with a patient or family, right? Sharing that story. What does it mean to them when I got the diagnosis? How did I feel? What was I worried about? Or it might be just stepping back and saying, not knowing anything about RB, but just general, what are you worried about? What do you think about on a daily basis? What are you looking out for your kid? Is it when you're washing their hair that you see if there's any bumps or anything on their head? Like, is it, for my son, it's the different interactions during the day are what are important to me. And that's, if you can connect with me on those interactions, you can connect on what I'm doing and how that's meaningful to me in my future.
Mm.
Does that answer your question? It was kind of.
No, it does. Thank you. I appreciate that. And a follow-up, if I may, really quickly. You mentioned the study you're doing currently having patient partners on all various levels and them being, equal, of course, players at the table. I'm just wondering if you might speak a little bit to compensation and how you, in your experience, like what your recommendations would be to making sure those patient partners feel that their time and their efforts are being recognized, especially when they're collaborating with other kind of paid individuals.
So different people have different motivations. But the first thing was we collaborated early. So I was brought in as well as another patient partner way on early in the granting process. So we built an entire budget around patient and family engagement. We, right from the top, we had compensation for every single patient that was going to work, plus the people on the executive. So that's the first thing. Plan early and plan for meaningful engagement. Don't just say, I'm going to partner with patients and families and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to budget for a couple of Cokes and, a couple of pizzas. No, plan early for meaningful engagement and the time it takes to do it. We also planned for a patient engagement coordinator because we knew if we didn't budget for that, whatever we planned for engaging patients wasn't going to get done because we didn't have the resources to actually do it. So that was the first thing that we did. But everyone has different motivations. So what we did in this study is to try and figure out who would sit well at an executive. What was their motivation? And we do now have more patients and families that are involved in research. So if you have a patient and family that wants to see visually what it's like to sit on an executive, participate in it, that's a different motivation than just wanting to be a partner in research. So tap into those different motivations, right? If you have someone who's really good on tech, they just might want the time programming something because it's practice for them for their day job. That's a different motivation. Tap into those motivations. So when we compensated, we mixed the compensation between experience compensation, financial compensation, which is clearly there. And because we're in research, my compensation actually doesn't go to me, it goes to the study team. But I'm motivated because I want to see this work. I want to be able to document how it's working and what we did well, because it motivates me in my job. So tap into different things and look for the right people in the right spot. Don't just assume that a patient partner is, is all of them are exactly the same and they're only one perspective. Look at the individuals of them and what fits them, but what will sustain them as well. And that comes from conversations. You can't assume that.
Thanks, Francine. I'm feeling really inspired by your talk, and particularly your journey from, mom to research directly. I think that's quite unique, and I think many patients might first go somewhere like advocacy or fundraising. And as a researcher, I see the value of research, and I sometimes find it challenging to communicate the fact that research is actually part of clinical care. The great clinical care families get through the RB teams is there because of research. And so often that connection is missed. How, in your experience, is that connection of how integral research is to delivering the best quality care now and in future? Is that clear? Are there better ways to communicate that? Tips, I guess?
It's not clear. And my path to research was not that clear either. I actually struggled in my first few years because my path was, I want a solution. I came from the world of consulting. A client comes to us and says, this is our problem, find a solution for us. And we, come up with a solution, present it to them. They pick one of 5 that we present to them. We don't have to go through all the rigmarole of research of finding the best evidence. Like, we collate that evidence, but we didn't have to do all those steps. So I was a solution finder. That was my goal. To understand how solutions and research interlink, but are not interlinked, all that is clearly not clear, and needs more time for people to understand that what is the end goal and what is the path to get to that goal, I think is something that's really valuable in patient and family engagement. I was going to bring up your, if you want to hold it up, Yvonne. So this piece of work, I've just been thrilled about. I've been seeing it and looking through it and flipping through it. This is a step towards that translation, right? It shows that we have goals. Our goal as a patient and family group is to find solutions, but the steps along the way are clearly delineated here. But even more importantly, the steps along the way show you what your potential role is as a patient and family advisor. And there are different roles for different people at different steps along the way. Some of them might just be sharing your story, which is that, I partnered on this work. It made me feel good. I really liked what I did because of this. Doesn't have anything to do with research. It has to do with meaning. It has to do with feeling. It has to feel part of a community and contributing. That is a valuable role in patient engagement, because what you're doing is opening the door for the next group to come in and holding their hand while you do it. Anything online? You go in the room? All right.
Sorry, I don't want to take from anybody's online questions. Oh, okay. Let me go first.
I don't actually have a question. I just turned my screen on.
Oh, okay. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mary. I wanted to ask you about the kind of interesting position that you found yourself in, where outside of the classroom or outside of the clinic, you felt that researchers or healthcare professionals were viewing you in a different way. Do you think, aside or other than transitioning from the role of maybe somebody that's just walking around in the hospital and then directly to the role of being a patient or being provided care for, was there, do you think that there's anything else in there? Do you think there's like a missing piece in there that could have kind of changed the treatment? I know you said they're the same side, they're two sides of the same coin, but that's really interesting to hear. I mean, unfortunate, but interesting to hear that. I'm just curious to think if there's anything else other than the patient role.
So there are some things in medicine that even as we transition between clinician and researcher, you see it too. You know, clinicians, you know, they kind of put boxes around relationships, which is good and self-protective and totally necessary sometimes. But if you're a clinician researcher, now you're asking for research to have conversations with them about their lived experience. So that's actually the inside the outside classroom dynamic right there in one person of a clinician researcher. And I've experienced that. I started my work as a patient and family advisor to my son's clinician. And that started about 7 years ago. We're now in the midst of a randomized clinical trial of an idea that I brought to help to find a solution to a problem that we had, which was the transition from hospital to home when you have a mechanical ventilation and basically moving home with a mini ICU. There was a gap in understanding the patient experience and how we could be supported in that. And I've danced that line, like, should I be having these conversations with my son's clinician about this? But it's clearly part of care, right? Like, she was there supporting us as we transitioned home. So why shouldn't we work together to find a solution on how to transition home? But did we cross lines? I don't know, because I don't know where those lines are. So I think to answer your question, if there's something else, it's looking at people as humans, but also looking at their experience is not necessarily a medical experience, but a life experience that is very important to sustaining life. So my son transitioning home was a burden on me. I had to have alleviation of that burden if I was going to care for him. I was going to care for him so he could survive. It's all healthcare. It all comes together. So I can't compartmentalize my doctor, my son's doctor, versus my research around that same space, because to me, one leads to the other. So seeing your patients as humans, seeing the families as people with problems that you have the potential to solve with research, and then bringing them in on that process so that they're involved in how that research is designed is very, very important. But it's still something we dance around in healthcare in different ways.
Thank you.
I think we have one, what do we, time, one more question? Yeah. If you say it, I can repeat it.
There are two questions online. The first one is, how did you gain confidence to deal with the power imbalance of healthcare providers? I'll start.
Okay, so the first question for those that couldn't hear it was, how did you gain confidence to deal with the power imbalance between providers and advisors? I don't know. I will be fully honest with you. I don't know. However, what I did find is support of other patients and families advisors that also were acknowledging that there are power imbalances. So together as a community and together as other patients and family advisors, we could validate each other's experiences about feeling like our voices aren't heard or power imbalances. And then as a group, figure out ways to overcome it. So, you know, what we would do is build each other's up in their confidence and saying, oh yeah, that happened to me too. Oh yeah, that happened to me too. And you hear enough of it that you realize that you're not just, I wasn't just really quiet in the way I talked, or I wasn't just different in the way I interacted, or I just didn't use the right language that I should have been using for them to hear me. Once you hear that from other people, then you kind of grow as a community with confidence, but you grow through individuals building their confidence in how they interact. So my one piece of advice to both patients and families, but also to research teams, is do things in pairs at the minimum. Don't invite one advisor to the table, invite 2 advisors, 3 advisors, 4 advisors to the same table. And the reason that you do that is they validate each other's experiences. You get to see different perspectives at the same time, but they also are there to hold each other's hands up when one falls, or if one is like, I have an emergency with my family, I can't participate, they don't feel that pressure to have to join that meeting because they're the only one at the table. I felt that before. I'm like, if I don't say, my husband hates it when I say yes to too many things. But I always have the burden of being like, but if I don't say yes, there's no patient at that table. And that made me feel worse than arguing with my husband that I'm too busy. So I'll never make the patient feel like if they're not the one, there's no one. So invite as many to the table as you can, because I think it just helps build confidence. Second question? So what would you say to patients that just don't have time to partner in research? So what I would say to you is tell us how you want to engage. There are many, many ways to engage, and it could be as simple as, when an idea pops into your head because you've had an experience in clinic and it made you feel bad, where can I type that so that someone gets it? And it's not just lost in my head or lost in a argument or a yelling match that I scream at the clouds. That's engagement. But you have to share with people in power, how do I get this to you? Are you comfortable if I just email you randomly? Is there an email address that I can send this to that has that? Is there something that I can do that when I have these one-off ideas, that happens? Because that's how sometimes it happens. You don't need to have a time commitment because everyone has the capacity to contribute. The challenge is there a pathway for your contribution? So those conversations with research teams, those conversations with your clinicians are, give me the pathways to contribute in the way that I can contribute, because I don't have the time to contribute with a 2-hour meeting once a month. But I might have an idea every other month that I'd like to send you in 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I will be mingling around. If you want to come talk to me about anything, just come up and say hi. I'm always open to love talking about this. This is my passion. I do this because I love this. And it has changed my life because it brings me so much meaning every day. And the thing that changes my life is seeing and hearing the stories of patients and families that have had the opportunity to contribute. And not just the work that comes out of it, but the smiles on the faces of knowing that the work that you did brought meaning to you. That brings meaning to me. So thank you for that opportunity.